in that it does what you've created it to do, what you've trained it to do in this case. But what's important about AI that's different from classic software is that it can do some unique things. It can recognize faces. It can recognize your voice. It can write an email, sometimes well, sometimes less so. What makes it special is you don't have to program it to do that. So there's a difference between classic software where you press a button and it does a thing every single time, or it's a bug. In the case of AI, it may or may not recognize something. It may or may not write the way you want it to. So it's more about probabilities than instructions. But before we even get there, the thing I want also to keep in mind is it's not magic. I hear people talk about AI as if it's some magical thing that's going to, it's coming, but when it's coming, it's going to solve all our problems. My back won't ache anymore. My taxes will be paid. So it's under the hood. What's different about it is it's math, not magic. I don't even know what that thing is, except it looked cool. So what I want you to think about is when you're using kind of classic, really well-made software, again, like a RedTeam and Excel, it's based on instructions. Someone wrote everything you do there. Someone wrote a line of code or some lines of code that makes it do something. In the case of AI, actually, it's based on probabilities because it's had a bunch of data that got it trained. So you've all heard data's the new oil, or you need a lot. You hear people saying we don't have enough data. Our data is not clean enough for AI, so on. That's true, but the point that matters here is when you're thinking about classic software, it's again, you press a button, it does a thing. When you're thinking about AI, it will do something for sure, but often there's a variability in what gets back to you, which is one of the reasons why I chose this picture here. So this is actually kind of a classic machine vision, recognizing people in their handbags and so on, and you can just make out that there are little probabilities there, like person 0.87. And what winds up happening behind the scenes is it recognizes a thing or it sees a thing, and somebody who's making the software that's running this AI has said, hey, if it's over 85%, say it's a person, or 95, or whatever the number is. Does that make sense? So the reason I want you to know this is, first of all, starting with the fact that you're talking about software, not some magical thing that's, some new class of thing, is already helping us to kind of deflate it a little bit and understand it. The second thing, though, is understanding that how it's different from classic software is really helpful. The thing about that, why it matters to you, is probability means risks. So well-run software, classic software, assuming it's been through its bugs and all the rest of it, it's going to do the thing it says every single time. In the case of AI, we have to build things around it to make sure that that probability doesn't include new risks. One of the things you'll often hear is always have a human in the loop. So nobody that I know of anyway is making software or making AI that just goes and does a thing and you never see it again. You don't automate things all the way. You automate steps, but there's always a human looking at it. For the foreseeable future, that's still going to be true. For the foreseeable future, AI is not ready to be left, left on its own. And then so we build software around it to manage that. But the key thing here also is AI is not a silver bullet. So as you hear things like, oh my gosh, 47% of jobs are going to be replaced by AI. No, they're not. Possibly 40% of tasks, but you're still going to need people. And there's a whole thing I'm going to get to in a minute about that. So now that we've kind of established that AI is software, it's different from classic software, then we have a whole other thing to talk about. When you hear people talk about how this is going to impact the construction industry and how you're going to use it, very often they say, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough of this. That assumes that there's just one type of AI, and there really is not. There are two that I want to talk to you about. You could always make more than that, but there are two big chunks that matter. So for those of you who noticed that's like, your phone didn't have a Siri and suddenly you could talk to your phone, 10 years ago, that was deep learning. So that the first kind of wave some of you may have heard of about 10 years ago was a little bit less than that, but it was deep learning. And all deep learning means is we've taken lots and lots of data, trained a model to be able to recognize things. So its main contribution is it can recognize things. It can often do them so fast that you don't realize that's what it's doing. But when I speak into Siri, it is recognizing the words and the sentences, and that's it. It's not predicting anything new. It's not creating anything new. It's just saying, Hugh is probably saying this, and it's getting better over time. Some of you may recall early on it was pretty funny what it couldn't do, but now it's pretty good. And some of the reason why, by the way, Siri and other things like it have gotten so much better is they've just gotten much more data. So more and more data tends to make deep learning work better and better. So one of the things that we often hear is that, oh, the construction industry doesn't have enough data for AI. They mean this. They mean deep learning. And what they mean is you need to have hundreds of thousands to millions of examples of the same thing organized the same way with a label on them. Well, think about your daily life. That would be hard to do. Even for the biggest contractors, that's really hard to do. So we typically don't see deep learning that is grown from within our industry. We typically see we took AI from somewhere else and applied it here. In contrast, we have generative AI, which is what you've just been hearing about. So this is ChatGPT. This is all the, excuse me, DALL-E and all these others, where it's actually able to create things. Two things changed. One is it still is a version of deep learning. It got a lot bigger, like a lot bigger. And there's a new architecture called transformers, which isn't so big a deal. What matters, though, is that where deep learning wasn't really relevant to your day-to-day unless you were using some product where someone else baked it in, you're going to be able to use generative AI in your business. I mean, you can do it now, but the point is over time, what you're going to see, more and more products will do things like take documents that you've created and learn from those without hundreds of thousands of examples, maybe one or two examples to say, hey, this is how I want an RFI to be filled out, and it will be able to fill them out for you. So you're going to find, this is also why we're even talking today, is that generative AI brings new capabilities. You still need a human there, but it brings new capabilities. And what's most important is you don't need hundreds of thousands of data points that nobody has or has the time for or has the money to go and get. So suddenly the benefits of AI will be valuable to you and accessible to you at a level that wasn't true with deep learning. Like Google does deep learning all day long, but of course they do. Most other companies, unless you're a bank, you just don't have that kind of data. So a way of looking at this is deep learning turns data into information. So it takes stuff you have and classifies it. It says, that's a dog, that's spam. So again, you often see that in really big systems from Microsoft or Google or whoever. Generative AI allows you to turn knowledge into wisdom. So, and I use the word wisdom loosely here. Let's call it action. But the point is you'll be able to feed it things and it can summarize it for you, or it can pull out bullets for you. We do this, my company, the link does that with specifications. You pop in your spec book and it'll pull out a submittal log and some other things. But you're going to start seeing that more and more, both from products that companies like I create, but also just generally, whether it's from ChatGPT and so on. So that sort of ability to navigate lots and lots of documents is already here and is going to become easier and easier for you to use without having to be, a specialist. Yeah. So why does this distinction matter? So we talk about how deep learning's been around for a long time, but you really didn't hear about it so much. Part of that, as I mentioned a moment ago, is you just didn't have enough good data. Most applications were powered by something else. So, you really didn't deal with it so much. The thing to know about this, though, and it's true of all AI, is that the data quality, quantity, and the size of your problem were a big part of what made it work. Hold on. I have something else to say, I promise. Oh, hang on a minute. Okay. And in contrast, generative AI is new. Lots of hype because actual people are using it. That's the reason why, again, we're having this conversation now. How many of you have used ChatGPT? Now, I'm going to date myself. Do any of you remember? It's okay if you don't raise your hand, just nod. Remember the first time you got on the internet with, in my case, it was AOL. There was this moment of like, wow, this is so cool. I can talk to people over there and do all this stuff. Then you're like, well, how am I going to use this? Like there was a moment of this is so cool. And then for like a couple of years, you were like, I'm not sure how I'm going to use this. In the case of generative AI, that's how I felt with ChatGPT when I first started writing stuff. I was like, this is so interesting. I can do all this stuff. Then it takes a minute to figure out how to turn it into a product. But that's what we're seeing right now. And the thing I'd like you to take away from this is the biggest risk that I certainly see, and folks smarter than me see, is the risk with generative AI is that you're going to trust it before it's ready because it looks so cool. And like, so some of you may have come across this, the example of the lawyer who used ChatGPT to write his summary arguments, closing arguments. Anyone hear about this one? If you want to laugh, go Google it. Because what happened, at least two people did this. They were like, hey, I can just have it. And then it comes out and it sounds great. And the citations, the case law were written perfectly. So this must be right. I mean, look at that. It looks so professional. This is where we're going to run into trouble because unlike a normal idiot, ChatGPT writes as if it were a PhD. So the things we normally look for to kind of indicate that someone's an idiot, it doesn't do. It's just wrong. So one person got disbarred, another one had like a big fine. Yeah. Can you imagine? Like I think you deserve to be disbarred if you're having your machine right. But anyway, moving on. What is a challenge with generative AI? And so the risk is that you're going to trust it. The challenge for using it today is asking good questions. Right now, what I see people doing is treating ChatGPT and other things like you're talking to Google. By all means, start there. But you can actually, the reason they use the word chat is you can ask a sequence of questions. So the first answer isn't that good, ask it again. Go online and look at YouTube and just look at prompt engineering or prompting is good enough. 5 minutes and you'll be better than you were before. It's just, there's a way of asking the question. And the way I like to say that, to make an analogy here, it's like an intern. An intern may be really good at looking things up, but have no idea about your business. So you need to give that intern better instructions than, hey, is there anything wrong with this spec book? Or is there anything wrong with these plans? You need to give it context. You need to give them some background. If you do this with ChatGPT and generative AI, you're going to find much better answers. So when we talk about deep learning, so when someone comes to you and say, I've got an AI product, it's amazing. Now you're able to say, well, is this based on deep learning or is this based on generative AI? If it's deep learning, you can ask questions about how do we ask it questions and so on. But in the case of deep learning, the question I'd ask you is the problem, are you handling a problem that's too big? Are you trying to get too much done? Do you have enough data to get this done? And what level of accuracy are you going to give us? So those are the kind of three trade-offs. So we hear in the service business, we hear you can have money, you can have budget, time, and quality. Get two of them. Kind of like that here. You can either have a bigger problem with a ton of data and lower accuracy. One of the three is going to give. You find, for example, Google, who has all the money in the world and all the AI people and data in the world, even they have over 5,000 models in production because they always want to make the problem smaller. So when you can, if you're doing something with deep learning, if you can make the problem smaller, and that's kind of true with generative AI too. If you ask too much, you're going to get either a bad answer or an answer that doesn't help you. So anytime you can make the problem smaller or clearer, it's going to work better. Again, a lot like an intern. If you ask an intern to do something that has too many steps in it, you're going to get gobbledygook or you're going to get that stare they give you. If you give them a little bit more information or you break it down, you're going to get a better answer. So just real quick, because I want to be conscious of time. What winds up happening with AI generally is in the beginning, you don't need a lot of data. Until you get to about 80 or 90% accuracy, suddenly it gets crazy. This is why none of you took a self-driving car here. I actually saw this chart in 2018 when everyone thought in 2019, oh my God, we're going to have self-driving cars. It's going to be amazing. This guy who does this for a living, a guy named Alexander Wang, who runs a company called Scale.ai, said, we're not going to see self-driving cars until 25 or 26. He wasn't wrong. I mean, we're thinking it's getting there. And the reason for that is as you need things to be super, super accurate, there just isn't enough data out there, or it takes forever to get. Again, if you can make the problem smaller or you can accept less accuracy, it's going to wind up being better. So that when someone comes to you and saying, I've got an AI product for you, that's one of the things I'd encourage you to ask is, how much you taken on here? I'll give you an example. There's a couple companies who've taken hundreds and thousands of schedules and created AI that can take in your schedule and point out where the risks are. Bless their hearts. I have a feeling that problem is a little bit too big, and people that have tried to use those have found the same thing, is that the answers it gives back are not really that useful. They're kind of cool if you're an academic. So I think that's a general point, is that AI is still made by humans and is not magic. So if you try to ask it too much, you're going to get answers that don't help you so much. In contrast, if you ask it a question that is well-formed and good, you're often going to get amazing answers and things that you wouldn't know how to get yourself, or you don't want to spend the time to do. And that's a big one here. So how do we trust AI? This isn't all downers today, but I want to arm you with some understanding of what you're looking at. The problem with AI, I mentioned before, is that we're sometimes going to trust it before it's ready. And the reason that happens is it won't fail like we will. We're really good as humans at understanding how other human brains work. So if somebody screws up, you probably know why. You certainly have a couple of good guesses, and one of them's probably right. That's because our brains work the way our brains work, in kind of a top-down way. We have a kind of model of how the world should work, and we kind of gut test. That's what gut really is a kind of a model of how the world works. So when things come at you, you can judge them against that model, that sort of top-down idea. AI is the other way. It's looking at the data, summing it up, and saying, I think this is what's true. And I'll show you how that matters in a second. This idea of theory of mind, though, is a thing, like, you guys remember stories about pet rocks? Like, we want to make everything into a human. So imagine if something's writing good English at you, of course you're going to think it's like a human. We're just naturally going to try to treat it like a counterpart. We're just wired to do that. Resist the temptation. So the analogy I like to make here, the example rather, is lots of universities, when they're teaching deep learning, when they're teaching AI, they'll use dog breeds because there's just great data out there. So in 2017, there was a group of folks that were trying to make an AI that could recognize dog breeds. Again, it's just a good exercise. Turned out that for whatever reason, it kept confusing huskies with wolves. Now, a human is going to say, well, they look alike. The eyes, the snout, the coloring, the whole thing. It turns out that, so that's kind of a top-down view of how the world works. We think things look the same, and so that must be the reason. What wound up being true is that all of the photos of huskies and the photos of wolves had snow behind them. So it got confused because it was looking at something a human wouldn't have even considered. We wouldn't have even thought about the background. We think about the foreground, but AI isn't doing that. It's looking at the data you gave it, and it's drawing conclusions. So the reason I give you this illustration is because a human's intuition on why it got it wrong wouldn't have been right. And they actually just didn't know until they looked in at what was going on. So that's kind of a cautionary tale to tell you that lots of really powerful tools are coming. It's important that you not get lulled into a sense of, if the first 90 times it's perfect, you still need to have somebody looking at what comes out of it. Because the 91st time it's going to mistake a husky for a wolf, and you're going to have a problem. So the key takeaway there is, for the foreseeable future, these are tools that augment you. They don't replace humans. So when you hear things like, oh, these jobs are going to go away, really they're not. What will happen is tasks, and you may need fewer, junior people to do certain things, or you may need to, but ultimately the analogy that you hear, when people talk about actually losing employment is the ATM. So some of you may, here I am dating myself. There was a moment when the world did not have ATMs. Then there was a moment when the world did have ATMs. And at the time, everybody was losing their minds thinking that bank tellers were all going to be out of work. What really happened was ATMs replaced the lowest value thing that a bank teller does. And they were able to make fees on it they couldn't make otherwise. So what wound up happening is bank branches were more profitable, not less. And there are more bank branches, therefore more bank tellers. So the interesting analogy, now it doesn't always happen this way, but it can happen this way. And that is that the thing that bank tellers hated the most got automated away. The company made more money per installation and therefore had more of them, and there wound up being more. The kind of concept there is, if I'm using something and it goes down in value, I go up in value, because the combined two of us has just gotten cheaper. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a sec. So AI and project delivery. So one of the things I'd like to tell you is that I've been in technology one way or the other for about 30 years. By now you've guessed I've been around for a little bit. I've never seen anything move even close to this fast. I was working at Sony Electronics when broadband was coming, nothing like this. I was working at AOL when broadband really was coming, nothing like this. This is the fastest technology has moved, certainly in my lifetime, and I would venture to say really at all. What matters there is that you're going to start seeing not just things better and faster, but different. So what you're starting to hear about, and over the course of this year, you'll really hear about, is this idea of agents, AI that you can point at a goal and it'll figure out how to get to that goal. Again, you want to keep in mind, keep a human in the loop. You always want it reporting back to someone who can apply their judgment and just kind of human sense of the world. But the idea here is, imagine not replacing a person, but replacing a bundle of tasks. So if you were to go and say, what do our junior people do that drive nuts or seems like the dumbest thing they do? What if we were able to pull that out and have an AI do it, and they can focus on things that are a little harder or a little bit more, beneficial, and more importantly, add more value? So what you're looking at over certainly the next year and a half, 2 years, is some of the lower level things that everybody does, being able to be automated so you can spend more time either thinking or just kind of not working at 9 o'clock at night. For me, that's the productivity gain, right? Is that people aren't doing things extra hours, like cleaning up their paperwork and so on. Because that's where I think you're also going to find that AI helps a lot. is with things like shuffling around data and paper, the things that everybody absolutely gets up in the morning loving to do. He says with another wink. Just imagine, though, that the key thing here is that AI has no people skills. So you've got like a genius who can't talk to people. How can it help? So here's some concrete examples after everything I've just told you, some stuff that it can really do. The first one is no more blank sheets of paper. So imagine if every time you wrote an email, you didn't have to start with a blank one. You can actually start with a draft. It's a lot faster to kind of edit something than it is to write something. It's a lot faster to edit an RFI or a change or whatever the document is. Having it filled out without having to rewrite the same jobs numbers and all that other stuff. A lot of that stuff you're going to find gets automated. Still have to eyeball it, but minimizing tedious search and summarizing, right? So I spend a lot of time in specifications. I spent 3 years at CSI, so I've kind of soft spot in my heart for those wonderful little documents. It's like 2,500, 3,000 pages, and it drives people absolutely nuts. Well, now AI can go through and find things and summarize and make lists and do all this. And that's just one. You can think about contracts. You can think about codes. You can think, so all this stuff, you're finding more and more powerful AI tools that will help you to get the information you need much faster with a lot less flipping through pieces of paper or remembering what master format number it was. So I think these are really easy wins that you'll find pretty quickly. And again, I encourage you to explore some of this because there's just the amount of time it might save is meaningful. Speeding up analysis, so extracting plans, extracting spec information, summarizing it. One of the interesting things is these tools are often able to make a table for you. Like the way you think about software over the next little while will change because it'll make a table for you or it'll make an interface for you. It won't be as reliable as battle-tested software like a RedTeam, but if you need something quick, it'll be able to throw something together for you, which is, I think, going to be really helpful. And then, the other one is just avoid guessing. So imagine you're in the middle of something, you're in the field or you're in the middle of a meeting or whatever it is, and you want to know what the terms were or or something about the job. Having something go find it for you and bring it back without having a 60 grand a year PE go do it for you will be nice. And I think that you're going to find more and more of that. So these are some easy wins that we know are coming. But a bigger point would be, what if you could automate paperwork, the repetitive tasks, the double checking? What if all of your documents actually agreed with each other? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? AI can't make it agree. What AI can do is flag for you things to go follow up and go ask about. But even that's a huge win. Being able to understand where things conflict when it's not 6 months into a job would be nice, and that's a good place to start. So it'll change the economics, and I'm going to kind of draw this one to a close. I think starting with documents. So here's the big question everyone asks: is it coming for your job? Now, I kind of hinted at this a moment ago when I talked about ATMs. There's a really good couple of books about AI if you're interested in this sort of question about where's this all going. It turns out that modern deep learning came out of the University of Toronto, and they've got a couple of really good economists up there that don't look at this like, the Wall Street Journal or some journalists would. They look at it as an economic question, which ultimately jobs are an economic question. And their point is, if you use the tool and the tool goes down in price, your value goes up. If you compete, if the tool does what you do, you're kind of out of luck. So that's the real question: is AI able to do what a human does? And the answer is no. Does it do some of what a human does? Yes. So the point is, for a lot of jobs, unless you're a social media marketer, in which case you're going to want to think about some other things like writing, marketing, and a few other things, is turning out to be a little easier to automate. But generally speaking, the things that make people good at what they do as professionals is the judgment, experience, and just kind of understanding of the world. The AI cannot even come close to. We don't even know how to do it yet. What it will be able to do is become a tool that makes people more valuable. So I think you're going to find that is the default, not the we're all screwed and the machines are coming for us. I think what you're going to find is that individual value goes up, and you're able to get productivity in a way that I think will start with better quality of life and ultimately might show up in productivity statistics. I personally don't love those because we can get into that another time. So within the next 5 years, skilled trades expertise is not being automated away. Judgment is not being automated away. Experience is not being automated away. What it will do is make the experience, judgment, and skills more valuable because the tools that go alongside it will become a lot cheaper. So you will be more productive per dollar spent, or your teams will. I've said this kind of already. What you can do now, and then we'll close. Avoid hype. Construction is still hard. No matter what someone comes and sells you, it's still a pain in the neck, and it's still, the weather still happens. Have someone really learn how to write prompts. So I'd encourage you to get someone on your team and say, hey, I need you to just spend a couple hours, go online, get on ChatGPT, and watch a couple videos on how to do prompts. It's not that hard. Really, it's not. It does take a minute to do. Check out, I do AI in construction webinars once a month. I'm doing one on IP and risk in 2 weeks. They're free, obviously. If you go on YouTube and Google my name, you'll see a bunch of them. Again, they're free. And try some lower cost generative AI products. I talk about ChatGPT all the time. I think that's a really easy one to get at. We have one too. I'm not going to sell it here, but and that would be what I do next. I think we're going to do Q&A.
Yes. So Hugh Seaton is not going away.
That's right.
We do a Q&A. And the reason I'm coming up here is because we want to make, this information is great. But in some ways it may seem inaccessible. So we want to have a conversation. So we want to have a conversation to make this conversation more accessible to everybody in the room. I did have a brief conversation this morning about ChatGPT, and I suggested to somebody, listen, just set up an account and play with it. It's really important. It's something that's going to affect everybody in the room, especially us in construction. So Hugh, thanks. I hope you formulated some questions. I do have a question that, Hugh ended with talking about AI coming for your job. And he provided some practical advice as to what we individually can do to make sure that we're understanding the technology and how it's affecting our immediate responsibilities and how it affects our organizations. But who gets left behind? Like, what's the risk in not really understanding this technology?
So you'll hear people say things like, AI is not going to replace you. Someone using AI is going to replace you. I think that's a little bit of it's not a wrong answer. I think it's just a pat answer. I'm not sure who's going to be left behind. I think what you're going to find is that people that have lower skilled jobs, people that are creating things or moving things around will suffer a little bit. I don't think it's going to happen immediately, but I do think in the next couple of years, people who do things like clerical work or are, as I mentioned before, doing some kind of writing that's much more high volume and not really kind of deep. I think that'll be who probably is in danger of being left behind. The interesting thing about generative AI, or let's just call it the chatbots, unlike every other technology ever, this one can help you learn. So you can ask it things. And by the way, here's a fun one. If you're ever about to have a meeting that you don't want to have or a conversation you don't want to have, practice it with ChatGPT because no one will ever know. But the point is, it's a really interesting moment where you have the ability to learn new things right there. And it's not like Google where you get a blue link and you're like, oh my God, I got to go figure that out. It'll give you a reasonable answer right there. And if you want that answer to be changed, you say, change that. You ask whatever it wasn't right about. So you have a partner in learning in a way that just wasn't true with any other technology. So the people that'll be left behind are things that it can replace. And what it can replace is sort of low level, intern level, moving the things around, clerical work, so on. That doesn't mean a bookkeeper, by the way, because bookkeepers apply more judgment than we give them credit for. I mean, sometimes. So, but what I think you'll find is that's who struggles. But again, everyone has at their fingertips the ability to start a journey of moving up the economic ladder or going somewhere else that AI can't do.
Awesome. Do we have any questions? Question.
Hey, thanks for the talk. It was very helpful. I do have a question. So I've done a lot of research with ChatGPT and prompt engineering. And the question that I have that comes up the most is when you create your own GPT for your company and you've engineered it to where questions can be asked and it spits out responses based on the documents you've made, how do you keep that secure? Like what is the IT process there to make sure that data doesn't get leaked? Because it's very powerful, but that's a big risk. And I think that's something that definitely needs to be mentioned and brought up in construction specifically.
Yep. So a couple things. One is basically it's a cloud technology now. So just like you would trust RedTeam or Procore. There should be anyway, kind of guardrails around it, depending on who's building it for you. In the case of ChatGPT, if you go to GPT Plus, or I think there's another tier called Teams, it's not, the data is not going anywhere to train anything. They explicitly tell you that, and it's literally a breach of contract if it's going anywhere. And if you can't trust that, then we're in deeper trouble. Beyond that, you're talking about kind of normal cloud security. Is it multi-tenant? Is it secure here and at rest and so on? The concern about data going up to ChatGPT and then showing up later, there was famous examples of like it would generate something and you'd see Getty images in the thing it produced. That doesn't happen anymore. But even more importantly, is there are enterprise tiers of, should be everything really, that won't do that anymore. So it contractually shouldn't be a concern. And again, if you're not trusting the contract, then again we have deeper issues. So it shouldn't be a problem like it was. But I think what you need to keep in mind is the same questions you would ask of any cloud provider, you should ask of this. What's their data protection policy? What's their privacy policy, and so on? That should be pretty accessible. If you're building things for your company, I strongly encourage you. You probably have done this, but for those of you who are considering this, whether it's ChatGPT or OpenAI, which is who does all the GPTs, or someone else, go look at their professional tier and understand how they treat your data and what sorts of cybersecurity and so on that you can incorporate in there.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That was really great. I can see just by your age, what I discovered when I was late looking at ChatGPT, and as soon as I looked at it, I was completely floored by the capability of it. And when I started asking around, it seemed pretty much everybody in a younger age demographic, they were all using it. They all knew about it. And so I realized I was one of the last people, it felt like one of the last people to actually look at it. So if you're in the room and you feel like you're in that category, don't be deterred, right? I really encourage you to set up an account and explore it. Any other questions?
Well, just one further thing there. Again, the interesting thing about this technology versus others is when you get in there, you can say, what should I ask you? It's really weird. You can ask it questions that you might have asked someone sitting next to you. It's not going to tell you look nice today, but it will give you interesting answers to start with. So the accessibility of it for folks who are otherwise busy and maybe don't want to suddenly become a ChatGPT expert, it's just really different from the Sage software that gave you such a headache at some point in your career. It's just it's a really different way of thinking about interaction with the technology.
So who else in the room is using ChatGPT? Quite a bit. And does anyone want to share their experiences on it thus far?
It's next level Google. I mean, I Google everything, so it gives me more detail that I'm looking for.
I've got a microphone here for you. Yeah, so next level Google, but is this a sanctioned thing within your organization?
No.
No, so it's just you just picked it up and decided to start using it.
To learn all the new stuff that's out there, I'm the Google queen. If you tell me you need something, I will find it. I'm that person.
Okay. I tend to be very picky about how I write things, and I'll tell you, I was completely blown away by just the quality of the output. But another question?
We'll see how this goes, right? I know how we're dealing with this question I'm going to ask you guys, but if you look at it, so AI is nothing but a tool, right? Let's call it what it is in a sense. And we were just talking about playing around with it as individuals. So what are you guys seeing as a change? I know what I get from my peers in a change in the industry in terms of how do we implement this? Because you talk about jobs not going away, and I agree with that, but you're having to shift some of your jobs. So in order to fully implement AI, whatever it is, whether it's a bot in accounting or, mild to wild, we don't have the infrastructure typically set up to implement something like AI other than our own individual efforts. So anyway, what are you guys seeing in terms of new roles? How does that structured? How are we as an industry handling that from a staff standpoint?
I have one story that I'll share with you, and I'm just repeating something I heard on a podcast, but I thought it was very interesting because it was somebody that works in our industry. It was the a person who leads the pre-construction team at Skanska. And he was talking specifically about how they use their, I think, a private instance of ChatGPT. We all know Skanska. They bid very, very large projects, and they'll typically have many people involved in putting together a client proposal. And what they do is they take the content from multiple authors and they'll run it through ChatGPT in order to create a single voice across the entire proposal. And I thought that was really fascinating because, quite frankly, it never occurred to me as an application of AI. You may have some other.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of them playing with it and getting creative and saying, hey, our pursuits team could use this. I think what you're going to find is, just like other software, there's going to be a range depending on what the internal capabilities are. Either it's going to come to you because it's baked into something else with like a RedTeam or something else, or a product like mine, or you're going to have an internal IT team who's going to do what they did, which is actually, create the infrastructure to have their own trained chatbot. One of the things I think you'll find is that it'll probably be more used in the office in the short run, and then actually kind of expand out from there. I think that's an interesting one where they're combining things so that it seems like one voice. That's sort of this summarization thing. Another one that's interesting is being able to give people quick access to documents. And I've hinted at this before, but one of them that's interesting, right at like almost as soon as ChatGPT came out, the chief information officer of Ernst & Young said, I see this being an incredible thing for knowledge management. So in an industry where we've got a lot of really high quality people who will be retiring out, some of their knowledge, a lot of it's judgment and intuition, all the things I say AI can't handle, but some of it, like here's where risks are. Here's what we've seen in the past, lessons learned. A lot of people have tried lessons learned in the past and it winds up being a spreadsheet on SharePoint that no one ever looks at. You now have something that can access those things. So I do think that from a knowledge management standpoint, I would encourage everyone to think about that. Are there ways that we do things? Are there, when we're estimating something, are there pitfalls we often find that we might train an AI to go look at and then expand from there? So I think that it's going to start with augmentation from tools that you either buy or kind of grow internally, and then from there it'll continue to grow. Hopefully that helps. I think it just like other software. If you're a $1 billion company, you have resources to do things internally. If you're not a $1 billion company, you take things off the shelf and make them your own. And I think that'll be true here too.
In my experience, I mean, it's all scalable. So I don't know how many people here you're going to have to dedicate staff if you want to have success to it. Mm-hmm. And it's all scalable, whether it's one person or whether you're a national, multinational, and you've got 20 people doing it. But, and that's just, it's a fascinating shift. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of that later too.
Awesome. Any more questions? Yep. Tim, you're going to have to run for this one. It's the opposite corner. Oh, we got it.
Look at that.
Hey, so do you see generative AI seeping into the engineering side too soon in terms of writing specs? Because my fear is an AI writes the spec and then a company like yours crunches the spec and then I hand it off to an intern to execute on it. I feel like I've taken too many humans out of the loop there.
So yeah, I'll take that one for sure. I think the spec-o-matic is a dream that people gave up on a while ago, especially MEP specs. I'm actually literally writing a white paper on MEP specs right now because they're just different from the architectural side. I think that they will augment the writing of specs, like finding products and examples and maybe checking code. But again, it's augmenting, not doing. The ability to think about the complexity of a job. I mean, great example. I'm working with a company that does plan checking for, and one of their big focuses is fire and safety. Oh my God. You don't want to get an AI near that yet because first of all, it's not really written as coherently as maybe we might want. But also there's a lot of if-thens, and if that's true, and if the wind's blowing, and if it's, you know what I mean? So there's just too many, it's too complex. So I don't think anyone's going to, and the other thing is you still have to stamp the specs. So hopefully we won't have any lawyers who try to write their closing arguments. But in all seriousness, I don't think anyone would take the risk of not reviewing it. So you may get drafts, you may get suggestions, you may get this was an issue before, maybe you might consider it now. But the actual automatic writing of specs, I think the only people who think that'll work are people who don't have to execute specs. How's that for a snide comment?
That's actually a great question, great answer. I will tell you, you did a podcast with a gentleman that runs a company called Document Crunch. It's a very similar thing to what you're describing, but more on the contract side, on the construction contract side. And I know personally, my concern with Document Crunch, because I've sat and I've seen judges look at a contract document and read one or two sentences over and over again as they make a decision. And so it occurred to me that there's a fair amount of risk associated with relying on a software tool to summarize a contract when very specific words are used in the contract, and it could, somehow change the meaning or the interpretation of an issue. But you did a podcast, and I thought it was really great to hear from the founder and the inventor of that technology, because they're actually advocating for human beings staying in the loop and really using it as a tool. So I would encourage you to follow Hugh's podcasts, and he's got some great information on there.
One quick one on that is even for us, which is more about specs, we may summarize it, but you click a button, you see the underlying document. That's got to stay true for as long as construction works the way it works, where the actual contractual document you're being held to, you need to be able to quickly find what you're talking about. It's nice that you gave me a quick answer, but I need to, especially if you're quality, like we hear that all the time.
Okay, I think we're down to just a couple minutes left. Any other questions?
I'm just going to make a comment. It's use it more as a tool. Use it as more as a tool rather than the no be all know all. Because what I've experienced, generically speaking, if somebody's under 25, they don't know what they're talking about, even if they're educated and have all that background. They don't know what they're looking at. And then you have to say, okay, yes, this is the right template, but this is what you need to look at. It's like with construction, it's like you have to know what municipality you're dealing with, what county and what their rules are and what the codes are. And the code in Miami is different than the code in Orlando. So people just have to remember it's a tool.
Not only do I agree with most of what you said, I mean, I'm meaningfully over 25, so I'm not offended. Trust me. That's right. I couldn't, I was going to ask. But one of the interesting things is, how many times has something come across your desk and you just feel like you got to check. So that sense of I got to figure out why, because it may not know immediately, but it's just you read through it and something just doesn't feel right. That's precisely what we don't know how to do with AI. Precise like that in the back of your mind, something is just, it didn't stack up. So there's no sniff test yet. And that's actually your point about keeping a human in the loop, I guess, can be expanded to say experienced human in the loop. But also, what can happen is you can collect moments that have gone wrong in the past. So it's not the same as the judgment and intuition of a real human, but at least it's getting you some of the way. If you imagine someone who's busy, you're going to think of 5 things when you look at a document. I'm just making that up. But what if there are 3 more that you might be reminded of? And still you're applying your judgment. You might say, yeah, those don't matter, but at least you've been recommended. That is an area where I think you'll find knowledge management in construction adds value, is it just gives you more stuff to just tick off. You know what I mean? As opposed to sitting there, am I forgetting anything? So I do think there'll be value in that. But again, it's just there's an old thing about complicated versus complex. I don't know if you've ever heard that difference. Complicated just means a lot of stuff. AI is going to be okay at that. Complex is when things interrelate to each other and knock-on effects. And if this happens, that happens. That's construction all day long. And that kind of complexity, we don't know how to do with AI yet. So you're safe.
So you, in the last minute or so that we have left, now that we're all engaged and we're really focused, we're going to take the initiative and we're going to get ourselves more involved with these AI tools. What can we expect to see in the next couple of years, 2024 to 2026?
So even this year, GPT-5 is coming out. It's probably in the summer. I mean, they're pretty bad about telling us quite when, but everyone expects the next round. And it will be better at accuracy. So you may have heard the term hallucination. Why they come up with these words, I don't know. But it basically means when it was making stuff up. way better at that. They're already way better at that, but it'll basically stop being a concern. It'll be a lot smarter, a lot more accurate. What is coming is this idea of agents that I hinted at before, where instead of giving you a one-turn, like I ask a question, I get an answer, you can give it a goal and it will go do things, including apparently it'll be able to, if you, of course, you need to give it access, but it'll be able to log into things and operate your computer to find stuff. That sounds scary, but keep in mind, it's not going to do anything you didn't give it the ability to do. They're going to make sure there's safety in there. So if you've ever seen from Disney, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, that's the thing that freaks everyone out, is if you give these things the ability to just go and there's no stop button, there's no automatic stop button. You go away and 15 minutes later, it's spent all your money, or it's, in the case of a Sorcerer's Apprentice, you got a lot of water to deal with. So I think the big story is going to be AI able to do stuff for you. Go, achieve goals that you give it. Like, go look this up, go make sure that all my codes are in compliance. Like, look at this spec, go check all the local codes and make sure that we're in compliance. It's an easy example. So beyond that, we don't all the way know, because some of what happens now is, what do people find, like what do entrepreneurs and what do people like you that are using it? Because actually the innovation that comes from user bases doesn't get talked about as much, but tons of innovation happens from Skanska saying, hey, we could do this. An entrepreneur could have made a product that did that, but they did it instead. So it's hard to know everywhere that it's going to show up, because a lot of that's going to be individual creativity. An example is the internet. When I first looked at it, I had no idea that Google would be such a big deal, right? Or Facebook, God help us. So who knows what people are going to create that these new technologies will enable. We just know that there's new things coming that will be, good, bad, and Facebook.
Hugh, thank you so much for being here. This is really great. It's an important conversation for everybody in the room. And also thank you for what you're doing for the industry, because Hugh is actually one of the leading voices on AI in construction. Like I said, he's a prolific podcaster, and so he's got a lot of content online. Please check it out, and then take a look at his company, The Link.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you both. I'm sure